Good morning, afternoon, or evening. My name is Jay, and the presentation is on the unintended negative effects of mental health awareness campaigns in adolescents. First, we'll go over the purpose, the guiding question of the presentation, and the background, that is, why schools elect to use such campaigns, and then go over some of the positive results of the studies. Then it's off to the emerging research, consequences, and how it all ties into child psychology, which, of course, is how it relates to this course. And last but not least, the conclusion and references, the heavy hitting items. All right, so it's a common belief that mental health campaigns just ooze with benefit. They reduce stigma, improve acceptance and understanding, or even promote help seeking behavior. But the question here is, do they also cause harm? While these campaigns are well intended, a growing body of research suggests that this might be a possibility. And I hope throughout the course of this PowerPoint to elucidate the potential negative side effects of mental health awareness campaigns, but not just that exclusively. A more astute conclusion would be that anytime you tamper with something, you must always check for the consequences, even the negative ones. As author Bloch famously put it, every solution breeds new problems. So, what are the positives? As we mentioned before, many of the baseline beliefs for which there is evidence for are the effects of reducing stigma, promoting help-seeking behavior, and potentially supporting early intervention. And it's important to acknowledge that these school-based mental health awareness campaigns have produced measurable results. Or benefits. Corrigan and colleagues in 2012 meta-analysis evaluated a wide range of these stigma reduction strategies and found that, overall, public attitudes towards mental illness improved. Campaigns that promoted education and contact with people who have lived experience with mental illness were particularly effective at decreasing fear and increasing acceptance. Similarly, Patalet and Gage in 2019 analyzed a UK population data and reported that adolescents with greater mental health literacy, that is, knowledge of mental disorders and their treatments, had better mental well-being overall. These students also demonstrated a greater likelihood of seeking help when experiencing emotional difficulties. Kutcher and colleagues in 2016 conducted a controlled study evaluating a mental health curriculum implemented in high schools, and their results showed significant increases in students' mental health knowledge and reductions in stigma towards individuals with mental illnesses. Lastly, a separate review by Clement and colleagues in 2015 reinforced these findings and emphasized that campaigns, including direct contact with individuals who had experienced mental illness, produced the most substantial improvements in public attitudes. However, and this is crucial, while these studies demonstrated success in increasing awareness, improving attitudes, and encouraging help-seeking, they largely focused only on these positive outcomes. Very few studies at the time explored whether such campaigns might also produce unintended negative effects, especially for vulnerable youth populations. That gap in the research set the stage for more recent investigations into possible iatrogenic or harm-causing effects, and that is research that we will now turn to. In recent years, researchers have begun to ask a new set of questions. Instead of only looking at whether campaigns increased awareness and reduced stigma, they've started to investigate whether the same campaigns might inadvertently cause harm, especially in adolescents. Some of the concerns that have emerged include stigma rebound, which is a campaign unintentionally reinforcing negative stereotypes, overdiagnosis and self-identification, which is students misinterpreting normal emotions as mental illness. There's increased anxiety and hypervigilance, which is the constant monitoring of one's own thoughts and feelings, and social contagion, the spread of harmful behaviors like self-harm or suicide through peer influence and media messaging. So, diving into the phenomenon of stigma rebound, where well-intentioned mental health campaigns inadvertently reinforce negative stereotypes. Corrigan et al. Conducted a comprehensive meta-analysis encompassing 72 studies with a total of 38,364 participants. They found that educational interventions generally reduced public stigma with an average effect size of D equals 0.30. However, they also noted that certain approaches, especially those emphasizing biological explanations of mental illness, could have unintended negative effects. Building on this, Schomerus et al. 2012 conducted a longitudinal study in Germany analyzing the public attitudes from 1990 to 2006. They observed that during this period, the percentage of people who believed schizophrenia as a brain disorder went from 55 to 75%, but paradoxically, the willingness to accept individuals with schizophrenia as a coworker decreased from 50 to 30%. And this suggests that while biological explanations may reduce blame, they can also increase perceptions of dangerousness and unpredictability, leading to greater social distance. Further supporting this, Fleehan et al. 2005 found that biological explanations reduced blame but heightened perceptions of dangerousness and unpredictability, contributing to increased social distancing behaviors. Now, these findings highlight the complexity of stigma reduction efforts. While increasing the awareness is crucial, the framing of the mental health information plays a significant role in public perception. Emphasizing recovery in personal stories rather than biological explanations may be more effective in reducing stigma without unintended negative consequences. The next one is epidemic of apprehension. As identified by Cho and Salmon in their 2007 study, this phenomenon occurs when health communication campaigns, while aiming to raise awareness, inadvertently amplify individuals' perception of risk, leading to heightened anxiety and hypervigilance. The mechanism behind this effect involves the overexposure to messages about health risks. When individuals, especially adolescents, are repeatedly exposed to information highlighting the prevalence and dangers of mental health issues, they may begin to overestimate their personal vulnerability. And this can result in unnecessary stress as they become overly concerned about their mental well-being, potentially leading to avoidance behaviors or reluctance to engage in normal activities due to their fear of exacerbating perceived issues. While the intention behind mental health campaigns is to educate and destigmatize, it's crucial to balance the messaging. Providing information about coping strategies, resilience, and the normal range of emotional experiences might help mitigate the risk of inducing unnecessary apprehension among youth populations. The prevalence inflation hypothesis, as proposed by Folks and Andrews in 2023, suggests that while awareness efforts aim to reduce stigma and encourage help seeking, they may also lead individuals to interpret and report milder forms of distress as mental health problems. The mechanism behind this involves individuals becoming more attuned to their emotional states due to increased awareness. And this heightened self-monitoring can lead to over-identification with mental health conditions, especially when the normal emotional fluctuations are kind of pathologized. For example, typical experiences of sadness or anxiety may be misconstrued as clinical depression or anxiety disorders. Exposure to mental health content, especially on social media platforms like TikTok, can influence teens to self-diagnose based on generalized symptom descriptions. A study highlighted by newsmedical.net discusses how adolescents are drawn to self-diagnose mental health conditions after engaging with TikTok content, driven by psychological factors like identity and belonging. The implications of this are pretty significant. As more individuals report mental health issues, it may appear as though there's a growing mental health crisis, prompting further awareness campaigns. This creates a feedback loop where increased awareness leads to more reporting, which in turn leads to more awareness efforts, potentially amplifying the perception of a mental health epidemic. Now moving on to the phenomenon of self-diagnosis and over-identification, particularly among adolescents. They engage with mental health content on platforms like TikTok. Kazenstein 2023 highlights the growing trend of teenagers self-diagnosing mental health conditions based on content consumed on platforms such as TikTok and Reddit. These behaviors can lead to unwarranted distress, potential misdiagnosis, and even inappropriate treatments when students act on inaccurate information. More importantly, some adolescents begin to form what psychologists term a sick identity, where a mental health diagnosis becomes a central part of their self-concept, even when it may not be clinically appropriate. Supporting this, Pramanik 2024 conducted a study revealing that adolescents increasingly self-diagnose mental health conditions after engaging with TikTok content. The study emphasizes that identity exploration and limited access to professional support are key drivers behind the trend. Adolescents may turn to social media platforms for understanding and community, but without proper guidance, this can lead to the adoption of inaccurate self-diagnoses, further compounding the issue. Karasava et al. 2025 analyzed the top 100 ADHD-related TikTok videos and found that less of half of them aligned with the established clinical guidelines. It notes that content often romanticizes ADHD and portrays it in a way that leads viewers to over-identify with the condition, even if they don't meet the diagnostic criteria. And this romanticization can trivialize the challenges associated with it and contribute to the spread of misinformation. These findings underscore importance of promoting accurate mental health education and encouraging adolescents to seek professional evaluations rather than relying on social media content for self-diagnosis. The most serious unintended harm identified in the literature is the Werther effect, and also known as suicide contagion. In 2009, Kilmes, Dugan, and colleagues studied the effects of suicide prevention campaigns on adolescents and found that some campaigns actually increased suicide attempts. This happened when the messaging focused too much on warning signs and statistics without providing coping mechanisms or stories of recovery. The messages, though well-intended, may have unintentionally reinforced feelings of hopelessness. Domoransky, 2021, expanded this understanding by looking at how media coverage and public health campaigns can normalize self-harm or suicide. When messages frame suicide as common, it emphasizes its tragic inevitability. And without balancing this with stories of resiliency and recovery, particularly youth, may begin to see suicide as an acceptable or inevitable solution. And this increases what is known as contagion risk. Adding to this, the most recent research by Gonzalez-Diaz, 2024, it was a systematic review, and they examined social media's role in suicide contagion, and they found that the Werther effect is not only real but amplified in the digital age. The user characteristics like age and mental health vulnerability, along with the type of content and how users interact with it, all predict the risk of contagion. And together, these studies show that even suicide prevention efforts can sometimes cause harm if they're inadvertently normalized self-harm or suicide, especially through poorly framed messages. For adolescents whose emotional regulation and critical thinking are still developing, these effects can be particularly dangerous. So adolescents process health messages differently than adults, and developmental psychology explains why they may misinterpret or overreact to mental health campaigns. By now, we've seen that even well-intentioned mental health campaigns can sometimes produce unintended effects like stigma rebound, increased anxiety, self-diagnosis, social contagion, the list goes on. But why are adolescents especially vulnerable to these outcomes? Developmental psychology gives us the answers. Several major theories explain why middle and high school students might interpret or overreact to mental health messages, particularly when those messages aren't designed with their developmental stage in mind. According to Piaget, adolescents enter the formal operational stage at around age 11, where they begin to think abstractly. However, this ability develops gradually and sometimes even unevenly. Many teenagers still rely heavily on concrete operational thinking, which focuses on black and white literal interpretations. So when campaigns present information about mental illness, symptoms, or risks, some students may over-literalize what they hear. For example, a message about recognizing the warning signs of anxiety. This might cause a student to believe that the feeling of being nervous before a test means they have an anxiety disorder. And this helps explain the epidemic of apprehension and the tendency towards self-diagnosis. It also contributes to stigma rebound, where students may misunderstand biological explanations for mental illness as amplifying that people are permanently broken or dangerous. In Bandura's social learning theory, it tells us that young people learn not only through direct experience, but also by observing others. And adolescents are especially likely to model the belief and behaviors they see in peers, social media influencers, and authority figures like teachers. When students observe peers talking openly about mental health diagnosis or see influencers discussing symptoms online, they might imitate these behaviors. And this modeling process explains both the rise in self-diagnosis trends and the Werther effect, where behaviors like self-harm or suicide can spread through peer groups or online communities. Next, we have Eric Erikson, and his psychosocial task of adolescence is resolving the crisis of identity versus role confusion, and teenagers are exploring who they are and trying to develop a coherent self-concept. When mental health awareness campaigns emphasize diagnostic labels, or when peer groups openly discuss and even valorize certain disorders, adolescents may adopt these labels as part of their identity, and this help explains what researchers call the development of the sick identity, where young people begin to identify themselves by mental health diagnoses even without formal evaluation. Next, we have self-regulation theory, which emphasizes the ability to manage emotional responses and behaviors, and it's a skill still developing in adolescence. When mental health campaigns increase symptom awareness without teaching effective coping strategies, students might become hypervigilant about their emotions. Instead of learning resilience, they might experience anxiety amplification. Minor feelings of sadness or worry, which are normally manageable, can become overwhelming because they are now associated with serious mental illness. And this phenomenon contributes directly to the epidemic of apprehension described by Cho and Salmon. With Vygotsky, he emphasized that learning and development occur in social context. During adolescence, peer influence becomes extremely powerful. When mental health labels become a central theme in peer groups, whether in person or online, these labels are reinforced. Students may normalize self-diagnosis or even valorize certain conditions. This can contribute to social contagion effects like the spread of self-harm or or suicide behaviors documented by researchers including Klimes, Dugan, and Gonzalez-Diaz. So, in summary, concrete thinking, misinterpretation of the messages, Piaget, modeling, adoption of peers and influencers' behaviors, Bandura, identity search, over-identification with mental health labels can be linked to Erikson, emotional vulnerability, hypervigilance and anxiety, self-regulation theory, even peer reinforcement, social contagion could be tied to Vygotsky. So taken together, these theories explain why adolescents are particularly vulnerable to the unintended negative effects of mental health awareness campaigns. Cognitive, emotional, and social factors interact in ways that can amplify misunderstanding, anxiety, self-diagnosis, and even harmful behaviors. Understanding these developmental vulnerabilities is essential for designing future mental health campaigns that inform without causing unintended harm. So to conclude, let's return to the central question: can well-intended mental health campaigns do more harm than good? We've seen that awareness efforts can absolutely produce positive outcomes, reducing stigma, increasing mental health literacy, encouraging help seeking, but research also reveals a more complex picture. Poorly framed campaigns, especially those that emphasize biological determinism, overload students with symptom checklists or fail to include protective messaging, and this can lead to serious unintended consequences, as we've seen: stigma rebound, hypervigilance and anxiety, self-diagnosis and sick identity formation, social contagion, and increased risk behaviors. These outcomes are especially concerning in middle and high school settings, where many of these campaigns occur and where adolescents are still developing abstract reasoning, emotional regulation, identity, and social boundaries. The solution isn't to stop talking about mental health. It's to do better. Future campaigns should be developmentally informed, nuanced, and focused not just on raising awareness, but also on teaching resilience, critical thinking, and how to seek professional help. Because when we speak to the young minds, how we say something is just as important as what we are saying. I know it was a long and lengthy one. Thank you for listening, and that concludes my presentation for the day. Here's the references. And thank you. I appreciate you very much.